we're going to set our sleeve in, and we're going to make sure that our sleeve marries up nicely with our armhole. So we're going to check our runs. To do this, we fit the coat to the stand, making sure that the armhole is nicely filled out, like so. And we're going to run our sleeve in with pins. So grab some pins, match up your front pitch first. And pin that into place. Pop a second pin a little further up, 1 inch further up, and then start going down the side. So I'm pinning around, making sure that the sleeve is marrying up nicely with the armhole. Now, distortions that occur from manipulation of the side or the sleeve can mean that these two can be out of whack, and we're going to make any micro corrections that are needed. As I'm going round, I'm making sure that the sleeve is draping nice and flush. And checking those runs, pinning it in place. I pin about a third of the way up the back side. Making corrections to the runs as I go along. I've got those runs married up, and my sleeve is draping uninterrupted through the front and the back. Then I know that those runs are both the right shape against one another. I can check my crown by folding the top of my sleeve back 3/8 of an inch and laying it in to my shoulder point, pinning that into place. If I find that there's a shortness in crown, I'll accumulate length through the underside over here. If I'm not accumulating length through the underside, then my crown is the right height. And as you can see here, everything's draping nice and neatly, so we can go ahead and insert the sleeve. With my sleeve now pinned into place, I then go from, so you can either make the corrections to these runs by unpinning and snipping away, or you can start basting in where the pins are placed. So I'm basting in a seam back from my mark on the sleeve, and I'm starting from the undersleeve and then working my way through to the top sleeve. So as far back as I pinned it into place, I start stitching 3/8 in from my thread mark. So my coat's turned inside out here, and I've got access to the inside of my sleeve. This is my undersleeve here, and I'm going to go round and baste it in against my armhole, staying 3/8 back from the edge that I've marked. As I go along, I can unpin. So you're inserting 0 fullness where the sleeve meets the side body. So it's flush against that length of cloth. and I'm only catching cloth and cloth. I'm not catching cloth and lining or cloth and canvas. It's cloth against cloth. So base that going around. So I've now come to my last pin on my top sleeve, and I'm going to go halfway up my forepart, filling in ever so slightly. So if you look here, I'm going to create tiny little bubbles of fullness coming halfway up the forepart to the shoulder. So tiny little bubbles of fullness coming up. And I'm raw edge against the mark stitch on my forepart. As I get closer to the crown, I increase that amount of fullness incrementally until I'm forming rather big bubbles across the top of the shoulder. And you can see those bigger bubbles forming there. And what you need to make sure is that all that fullness is concentrated at the top of the shoulder, so in the crown of the sleeve, and as you get back to the base of the arm, that fullness is going into nothing. Coming into the undersleeve and the back pitch, where my hind arm meets my back, I should be decreasing my amount of fullness. So matching where the inlay is, it's difficult, but you're matching thread mark to thread mark and sewing a seam back. And you're meeting the commencement of your other baste. You then check this, make sure that the sleeve is draping well, and if it is, pop another line of basting stitching in and sew it into place. So checking my sleeve here, I've got a nice amount of fullness distributed across my top sleeve. I've got the top of the forearm of the sleeve that's draping nice and tubular, and the hind arm again sitting nice and flush, no interruptions. So I'm happy with the way my sleeve is sitting, so I'm going to pop another baste in between the stitches that I'd already made to further secure everything down. Again, just to reiterate, I'm only catching top cloth. I'm not catching lining or canvas or lining behind that, just top cloth to top cloth. My second line of basting is now all in, and I'm going to go to the press board and press in all of this fullness, shrinking it in nice and evenly before I machine the sleeve in. So I'm now hand stitching my sleeve in. You can do this by machine, by flicking all of the canvases out of the way, flicking the lining out of the way, and stitching 3/8 back from the raw edge. Or you can do it by hand. Doing it by hand is a little bit easier, takes a bit more time, but it means that you can distribute the fullness in nice and evenly as you go along. And what you do is 2 rows of back stitches, one on top of the other, all the way around. Now that I've stitched all the way around, I check my work, making sure that I've distributed my fullness nice and evenly, and that my sleeve is still draping nice and neatly. I then further shrink all this fullness in, and then I can start basting round my armhole to finish off the canvassing process. My sleeve is now shrunk in, and I'm going to send a baste to finish off the canvassing. So through the front here, I just push it out and I catch top cloth and canvas. All the way around, making sure that everything is filled out nicely. I'm saying right into the edge, pushing all of the cloth out. Here I'm just catching my shoulder pad. Making sure everything is pushed out all the way. And as you come to the back of the pad, you can then start back tack. And now from this point down, I'm securing my linings into place by holding them nice and flush, make sure they're not tight. And securing my body linings in. So, all the way around, again making sure that my linings aren't tight, pushing my cloth out, and stitching down. Pulling out and stitching down. At this point coming back and stitching back down into my canvas where it meets my side body. And back tack once you get to the end. And now secure the front of my lining down against my pad. Down, and then ease it off once the pad finishes. So now that everything's secured down into place, the front of my side, across my shoulder, and all the way down through the top cloth in this section, so my linings are all fixed down, I then trim my linings and my canvases and my inlays back to a seam in front of my top sleeve and on the sleeve box, all the way around. So trim this all away. Very delicately, and then here and trim this all back to a seam allowance. It can get quite thick, so be a bit careful. Leave the seam allowance on the undersleeve. Just keep going down until you meet with the back. So, leave the seam allowance, so trim the seam allowance back ever so slightly on the side body. So, and then continue trimming the base of the lining at the armhole. All the excess is now trimmed back, and you now have the edge of your sleeve sitting flush against the edge of the canvas. You can neaten all of this up, and then our next stage will be to insert our sleeve head wadding. Now that that's all looking nice and neat, we're going to stab stitch all the way around the armhole with doubled up thread. So, doubled up thread, strong thread, stab stitch all the way around the armhole, 1/8 inside of the seam allowance. So I'm going to stab stitch just inside of my seam allowance all the way around, catching canvas, top cloth lining and shoulder pad wherever I go through. I work my way all the way around the armhole, making sure I'm inside of the seam allowance. Grab my sleeve head wadding, and I've curved this with the iron into a slight U so that not too much length of it gathers as it's inserted into the armhole. I grab the tone-on-tone thread on the double, at this point my armhole's entirely secured all the way around, and I've removed my basting stitches from my sleeve and I round off the sleeve head at the start. Like so. I stagger it. Like so. And then I insert it from the from the front pitch, going along the armhole. So I've got the folded edge of my sleeve head butting up against the raw edge of my sleeve. I line it up with my front pitch and I begin tacking it in place to the seam allowance to begin with. I then come back tacking in, lift the sleeve head up, insert my needle right behind my stitch line, like so. So come into the sleeve head, insert my needle right behind my stitch line, catch as much layering as I can, come back up behind my stitch line, move my sleeve head into place, fold edge against raw edge, and then come up. And I continue back stitching this in place with this method right behind my sleeve stitch line. All the way along. I'll show you again. I'm coming in, pushing back, putting my needle behind the stitch line, coming back out behind the stitch line, like so, and then laying my sleeve head back in against the raw edge and coming back up. I end my sleeve head wadding as my armhole starts to curve back out in the hind arm, and then at the back I do the same thing, curling around, making sure I snip only the sleeve head, not anything beneath it. And layering that layer of canvas in. I then check my sleeve, making sure that it's nice and filled out, and that concludes the coat making.